Hello, I'm the Angry Spork. When crime fighters from different universes cross over, they're often faced with certain differences of personality or methodology. However, a common sense of justice or law helps them put those differences aside. But does that change when a certain bat that operates outside the law meets up with a police officer whose execution of it might not be seen as having any justice whatsoever? It's an interesting question, so I'm taking issue with Batman Judge Dredd, Judgement on Gotham, written by Alan Grant and John Wagner, with art by Simon Billsley. Let's see if this comic makes us want to turn the page, or turn our heads in horror! 'Cause Halloween. The cover has this neat dynamic feel to it. Dredd on his cycle, Batman close behind, his cape seeming to encompass them both. It actually makes you wonder if they're heading towards the same target, or if the Dark Knight is in fact chasing the Judge. But they went and gave him red eyes, so I'm curious if they're going with Vampire Batman for this story.
I am vengeance. I am the night.
We begin with a bat symbol that kind of morphs into two people making out. Sort of like those images of the vase that's also two people in profile, but, mileage may vary if they got there. It's an odd visual choice if you ask me, but moving on. The two continue making out, even start to disrobe, even though it looks like they're outdoors on a motorcycle. Not exactly a great situation to be getting frisky. The backgrounds are just a trip, let's put it that way. They don't exactly help with establishing the location. Anyway, they're interrupted by a green-skinned, clawed individual that has plans to pass judgment on them. A scream rings out through the city, and we see Batman on a gargoyle, right above what I guess is supposed to be the Batmobile.
This is not what I imagined from a Batman Beast Wars crossover. Depth charge, what have they done to you?
The car has this cartoonishly organic look to it, like when a magic spell turns inanimate objects into living monster versions of themselves. The scream continues, and Batman's just standing there for most of the page, until reacting on the bottom panel. A panel I genuinely missed because I thought this was a splash.
I guess it's not a genuine cry for help unless the "Aye" ends in at least 35 E's, give or take. Trust me, I counted.
Police officers arrive, with their names on their sleeves, literally, for some reason, after the grisly figure has apparently killed the young couple. He introduces himself as Judge Death, and one of the cops opens fire. Die, you freaker! Did they just steal the lingo from Spider-Man 2099, or is this story somehow set in that alternate future?
Fools! You cannot kill what does not live.
Really? I have no life. I'm immortal! Time to take up juggling chainsaws with my feet while blindfolded. Whoosh.
Bullets have no effect, and Death finds the cops guilty of the crime of life, so sentences them to, well, you can guess. He grabs one of them, and it's not overly bloody, but I'm still censoring it. Let's just say it brings new meaning to the phrase face piercing. The other cop is narrowly saved by a flying kick from Batman, who actually swung over here, so I wonder what was the point of having his car around. Oh look, they're at a gas station. Good to know. For this obstruction of justice, the sentence is death.
Guy calls himself Judge Death, keeps giving guilty verdicts, and all the sentences result in death. I'm beginning to sense a pattern here.
The ghoulish figure charges the Dark Knight, who flips him over and impales him on a nearby fence. Not his intention, and the cop tells him not to feel too bad, especially given what happened to his partner. And there are now suddenly a bunch of people at the station, minding their own business, apparently not affected by any of this. Anyway, Batman isn't taking much consolation from any of this. Human or not, I had no right to take its life.
Some might find this kind of a divisive statement, and not just because of certain directors loosening or eliminating Batman's kill rule in some stories, but because of who just got fence-stabbed. Even though some of you, like myself, may not be familiar enough with Judge Death and his history, this story readily establishes what he's about and what he's capable of. So much like in so many action movies, when the sadistic bad guy dies, we aren't going to shed a tear. That being said, Batman's reaction is fitting, because he doesn't like the idea of killing and takes no pleasure in it, but nor is he apathetic to it.
Well, good news, Batman doesn't have to feel bad about taking a life, because bad news, he's not done. Death rips apart the gate and the cop opens fire while Batman orders everyone else away. A gas can spills and a stray bullet ignites it, so Bats has to quickly throw the container away before it ignites and dooms them all. Death, however, is set ablaze, which makes the surviving cop confident that this is it for him, totally for sure, but he just repeats that he can't be killed. He swears he'll pass judgment on the city as he intended, then I guess his soul just flies away.
Did you see that? Death incarnate! That's what it was! Get a grip on yourself!
On top of psycho clowns and killer crocodile men, now we've got brain-stabbing, unkillable ghost zombies! I'll keep a grip on my sidearm, thank you very much!
As the cop goes to report this in, Batman inspects the judge's body, finding a device on its belt, leading him to give the longest what I've ever read from this character. Ever. It's kind of weird, in part because it makes me think of that "say what" meme, and Bats should never say that. Oh yeah, and now he's instantaneously transported to an unfamiliar location with advanced technology. He's surprised by a man called Mean Machine, apparently looking for the bony fella. Even if the brute attacks him, the Caped Crusader is showing restraint, saying he means no harm. Cyborg, however, is less diplomatic, explaining how his attitude is dependent on a dial on his forehead, with only 4 settings: brutal, vicious, mean, and surly.
Hey, Surly only looks out for one guy. Surly.
Sorry, Surly.
Shut up.
When it's clarified he's looking for Judge Death, Mean Machine says they made a deal to use the dimensional belt to rule Mega City 1, and maybe the universe, but Death up and left on his own. The unusual pieces start falling into place for Pointy Ears, pointy and longer than normal, but the bionic stranger really wants that belt. He turns his dial to a meaner setting and charges Batman head first, but is dodged and sent over the edge of the building they're on. Naturally, even if this guy is cuckoo bonkers McGillicuddy, our hero can't just let him go splat.
I mean, what did he really do other than sucker punch me and charge at me like a robotic bull after too many energy drinks? At this point in my career, stuff like that barely gets my attention anymore.
Batman grabs his assailant, cautioning him not to struggle.
I'll struggle all I like, god darn it! Nobody rescues me less than I says they can rescue me.
There's forms to fill out in triplicate, timestamps, and X's what needs signatures. It's a bit time-consuming, but keeps things orderly, it does.
As they descend to, I don't know if that's a street, a large pipe, part of a structure, the sidewalk, or what, someone fires a shot that breaks the grapnel line. Good thing they don't fall very far. It's Judge Dredd, training his weapon on the two, but Meanie snags the dimensional belt and transports to find Death. Dredd intends on bringing in Bats as a suspect, telling him to cuff himself.
I've no quarrel with the law, if that's what you are.
I am the law.
Then he proceeds to clobber Bats, cuff him, and unmask him. It's a new dimension, so his identity is still technically a secret. Back in Gotham, Officer Coogan is telling his story over the radio, as Mean Machine warps in behind him, looking like a Picasso painting going through an identity crisis. Double M crushes his car and headbutts the cop, as his disbelieving lieutenant suspends him and sends a unit for him.
The bit about Death Incarnate I can see being a bit hesitant to buy, but guy with a big metal claw and a dial on his head ought to be considered normal for Gotham. But then the lieutenant didn't believe that Batman just disappeared, and that's his whole shtick. I bet if Coogan were talking to Gordon, he'd have gotten some backup already.
In the apartment of Judge Anderson, she answers the phone before it rings. She's called from someone at an interrogation cube about some creep. She's a telepath, so knows he's talking about Batman, just like she knew she wouldn't like the news that her old acquaintance Judge Death is involved. Apparently, despite his notoriety, Mean Machine escaped while on some kind of work-release program for psychopaths. Bruce, forearms tied to a chair, insists the belt he took from Death transported him to Mega City 1, and is sick of being given the third degree when he's committed no crime, as he has no connection to the buttist.
I tried looking, but I couldn't find a determinate definition for the term buttist. Though since we've seen Mean Machine attack with his head a few times, I'm going to assume it's a British idiom for someone who headbutts a lot. Frankly, I don't like entertaining what else it could mean.
As for committing no crime, his gear is apparently enough to give him 2 years. Incendiary device. Phosphor-based. 30 meters high tensile wire. Darts. 2. Tipped with tranquilizer. Projectiles. Precision weighted. 2. Knockout gas.
Huh. Actually sounds like Batman was traveling pretty light that night. Either that, or he expended most of his arsenal earlier. Muggings, Arkham escapees, another writer with a new reboot idea.
Don't be absurd. No court of law would convict me.
Yeah, they would. I mean, I like Batman and all, but he's carrying around non-lethal or less lethal weaponry in order to take the law in his own hands. Even if he was right in assuming that where he is now has the same laws as Gotham or the United States, they would still convict him. Probably pretty quickly.
This is Mega City 1, creep. I am the court of law.
I am the law.
The gear and the costume paints him as a vigilante, and Dredd does not like vigilantes. Anderson strolls in just as non-pointy ears starts with repeated insults to his interrogator's intelligence, which I'm sure will only help to endear him to the violent, angry man with the big gun. Anderson starts probing Bruce's mind to confirm his encounter with Judge Death, and first we see... well, I can't really describe it, so look for yourselves. The following splash page makes a bit more sense with a stylized collection of Batman's life. You can still make sense out of most of it. You can see Joker, Catwoman, Clayface, the one that needed a containment suit. Yeah, that was a thing. But I don't know who this weird vampire-looking dude is, or this guy in the mask with the whiskers.
Maybe it's an alternate universe version of Batman who was inspired by a Meow Mix commercial. I am the justice cats ask for by name.
Anderson confirms Bats is clean, elaborating that Judge Death is one of several dark judges, entities from another world whose philosophy is that since crimes are committed by the living, life itself is a crime. They wiped out all life on their own world, then made their way to Mega City 1 to keep the deadly momentum going. All of them were captured except Death, who can simply possess a new body as needed, and the judges have yet to find a way to contain him. I bet the spooky pose is just to help get the point across. Gotham will have to wait a couple of decades for Batman to serve out his sentence for breaking the law. According to Dredd, he begins arguing with Anderson that their 2 perps are outside their jurisdiction, and they can't pursue without word from the chief judge, at which point Batman breaks free of his ropes and punches him square in the face.
You call that justice?
I feel like somewhere in some alternate reality version of Atop the Fourth Wall, this is the phrase that replaced I'm a man as Linkara's punch-inducing meme. You call that justice? Wait a minute, lawsuit.
I really dig this shot, enough to not censor it. Feels a lot like that infamous image of Bruce socking Guy Gardner. But Dredd ain't Gardner and isn't out for the count. Bats just starts beating him like a dusty sofa cushion, each strike adding 10 years to his sentence. Dredd kicks him into a group of other judges that charge in, and they proceed to subdue Bats with their billy clubs.
I am the law, and the law is not mocked.
We jump to Gotham Morgue, where another body is wheeled in, with the security guard making light of people dropping like flies tonight, and trying to guess what killed the latest victim. Coronary, right?
No, he actually went out to dinner and keeled over right after dessert. When Applebee's calls it death by chocolate, they ain't kidding.
In fact, it's Scarecrow hitting the guard with Ferrosol, which is guaranteed ozone unfriendly. Can't say this story doesn't have a sense of humor, can we? Letting him experience his worst nightmare is preferable to simply shooting him, as Crane's undercover associate Benny would have liked. So they throw him in a cooler so the doctor can get the cranial fluids for his concoctions by drilling into the heads of the recently deceased. Using a hand-powered drill, because why not be extra visceral about it? Judge Death, the not-so-friendly ghost, flies in, fawning over the line of corpses, musing about the millions to follow before... boo! He's actually startled by Scarecrow, who's then pretty psyched about this unusual achievement. The far less amused Death possesses the villain, with his minion waiting for permission to shoot the ghost. As he's fading into Strawface's head. Yeah, Benny isn't a bright one. Fortunately, the ghost quickly leaves, so impressed with the Doctor's obsession with fear that Death suggests a partnership. Meanwhile, Bruce is being carried to a transport when Anderson approaches with his gear. You forgot his stuff.
Where he's going, the only thing he'll need is his bat briefs.
There's already a debate started on whether he should or should not wear them on the outside. There's also some lunatic wanting to draw a bunch of lines on his costume so it'll look more like armor, but we're all just trying to ignore him.
She kicks her co-workers into the van, hits them with knockout gas, then wakes the Bat Perp up, and takes them on her motorcycle on a splash page with a foreboding image of Dredd behind them. Their next stop, Gotham. In the morgue, Death wants Crane to help him possess a corpse, in exchange for showing him terrors the likes of which he's never witnessed. It's tantalizing enough that Scarecrow agrees, and while Benny retrieves robes of office, Death begins, well, picking out a new suit.
Dead Men's Warehouse. You're gonna like the way you reanimate. I guarantee it.
Dredd is informed of his partners taking off with their perp as they're taking a shortcut through the streets. Hey, what's a little traffic accident between interdimensional buddies? Anderson is helping Bats because this is one of those times her by-the-books associate is wrong. Going through procedural channels would leave Gotham beyond help before they even started going after Judge Death. Hey, remember that other guy looking for the ghost zombie? Yeah, Mean Machine. He's in Gotham literally busting heads in search of his two-timing associate. One guy is a tad more helpful, talking about a live show in Robinson Park called Living Death. And that seems to be close enough for Meanie. But he headbutts the guy just in case he's lying. We return to the morgue where Scarecrow is doing his part, using the proper chemicals to remove the remaining flesh from a particular body, which I guess is a requirement for him to possess it. It's a boy! His new robes of office are the garments of a biker that got in an accident.
You know, we did see Anderson cause an accident a few pages ago. Yes, it was another reality, but it's kind of hard to dismiss such a peculiar parallel. Unless they explain that the biker's accident in this universe was falling down the stairs, or a piano falling on him.
Other requested items were a little more difficult to come by, like a pterodactyl, so stuff like a chicken and a rack of ribs have to supplement. They literally nail the stuff to his body, add in a cowboy belt buckle and a poison label that has death misspelled on it for his badge, and Judge Death is back in business. But he absolutely hates it. He can't pass judgment on a city looking so ludicrous. Benny's best efforts gets his heart squeezed, which Crane is totally okay with. He's more fascinated by his goon's demise than anything else. The judge decides to pass sentence on Scarecrow as well, which was actually quite expected. So Crane hits the ghoul with fear gas, and it actually affects him. It seems like it shouldn't, but since he's technically in a physical body, it sort of makes sense, I guess. So what is it that fills him with such horror? Fuzzy rabbits, cute cartoon animals, and Pinocchio.
Maybe he's seeing a vision of the inevitable live-action Disney remake.
Batman and Anderson arrive at Tech 21, a facility that has a dimensional jump gate. Fury is already swarming the main entrance, so they blast a new one in the side of the building. They just need to head down one floor. Back at the morgue, Death is beginning to come out of his fear stupor, and is threatened with another hit if he doesn't cooperate. He yields, and his first task is to fulfill his promise of causing untold horrors for Crane, specifically somewhere with a large crowd. Knowing just the place, Scarecrow hails a cab, which seems surprisingly easy in Gotham, for a Gotham supervillain. Bats and Anderson make way to the Dimensional Lab, where her sidearm doubles as authorization. Their pursuers are too late to stop them from jumping, and report into Dredd. The two pop up in Gotham at the scene of Officer Coogan's assault and the crazy stuff he talked about. Anderson says they should get moving since her partner won't be far behind, so they make way to the Batmobile.
Hey, we got 4 stiffs here. Don't we even get an explanation?
I'm a cop. What do you expect me to do? Take statements from people that might have seen something? Look for clues and catalog them for evidence? Next you'll be telling me to protect and serve like it's on my bet. Oh.
As Dredd teleports onto the scene,
I am the law.
Anderson guesses it won't be long before bodies start piling up. Though she mentions Death has found a way to block her psionic scans, he must be off his guard, not expecting her to be in this world since she detects him quickly.
Whoa, for a second there, we almost had some tension in that scene. Or even possibly another obstacle for our protagonists to overcome.
She also senses he's joined forces with Scarecrow.
An unholy alliance.
Such awkward dialogue! I don't know, I've read some older comics with speech that was in some way a product of its time, but that line just seemed odd to me. Maybe because of the general vibe of the comic overall. Yeah, I still think I might have preferred Holy Unholy Alliance Batman! But that'd mean he'd be talking in the third person.
She also sees a name, Living Death, which Bats recognizes as the name of a metal band, and the open-air concert they're performing tonight.
Thus begins the great debate. Did Bats know that out of story convenience, because he's an obsessive detective that'll absorb whatever information he can on the off chance it'll be useful? Or is he secretly a big fan of metal?
As they ponder how they'll deal with their paranormal target, Dredd closes in on them, because of course he'd take his motorcycle across dimensions, who wouldn't? Bats initiates turbo boosters, and, if it exists in Dredd's universe, probably gives him flashbacks to Back to the Future movies. At the concert, where I guess the first thing to die was subtlety, a huge crowd has gathered, chanting the band's name. Even Mean Machine's in attendance, waiting for his former ally. He and Scarecrow are briefly stopped by a pair of men blocking them.
Sorry, guys. Love the outfits, but they don't get you backstage. Artists only.
Philistines! I am the artist supreme!
Macaroni art counts as art. I don't care what anyone says.
The band hits the stage, getting the crowd worked up as they chant for lead member Johnny Stiff, who I guess is the guy telling Death and Crane to frag off. It's freaky enough that his hand passes through the judge, only for it to come back green. He doesn't have to worry, though, because Death impales him through the mouth. When another musician gives an introduction for Johnny, Death jumps on stage, wielding a guitar, because why not at this point? As Crane fear gasses himself a camera for documentation, Death just chops a guy's head off.
Those are chock full of heady goodness.
Well, he had to eat something. Look at the guy. He's all skin and bones. Don't look at me like that. We all know it had to be said. So I said it.
Death begins riffing his own song about judging everyone while he kills the other band members, with the stewards realizing by the third onstage murder that this is not part of the act. Batman and Anderson arrive, with Joe Dredd still close behind. Yes, his name is Joe. And, well, there's a portion of this page I'm leaving out because it's definitely one of the most graphic panels in the book, and pixelating didn't feel like enough.
In case it hasn't been apparent yet, this book is in no way intended for children, and probably should be avoided by people who just don't like a lot of graphic bloody violence. But if you haven't read it and are curious what I'm leaving out, it involves a piece of stage equipment and a certain portion of one of Death's victims. Let's just say it would have been a pun if the guy's name had been Mike.
Mean Machine, irritated at the crowd in his way, sets his dial to 3 and starts charging right through. As Death deals with some futile attempts at stopping him, Meanie has charged right into the structure of the stage, and his dial is stuck at 4.5, causing him to lose control of his headbutting, resulting in a domino effect where he keeps destroying support beams.
Well, I guess that explains the box sound whenever he attacks. Apparently 4.5 is the setting for chicken.
I'm going into an uncontrollable butt frenzy!
Phrasing?
Anderson struggles to get a clear shot at Death because two guys are still trying to restrain him, and one of them ends up impaled before Batman swings in with a kick. He then confronts Scarecrow, fear gas at the ready, but Anderson manages to just shoot the can, leaving Crane at the mercy of his own weapon. Death then targets the Caped Crusader, attacking him with musical instruments and about to stab him with a guitar. If Bruce is a fan of metal, this may not be the worst way for him to go out. Then we get a splash page of Dredd, aiming his gun.
I have the law! Me!
It's not bad, it just doesn't feel like part of the comic. No dialogue, no other panels, no discernible background or sound effects. It feels more like a poster than anything else. But that pea shooter ain't for show, and he puts a few rounds in the zombie, though notes his partner is in deep trouble. Wow, he's so mad he forgot the space between two words. There is still the matter of Mean Machine, whose uncontrollable cranial concussive cracking takes its toll on the stage. Bats jumps clear of the collapse, but Dredd is not so lucky, stuck beneath debris and his weapon just outside his grasp as Death closes in.
Time after time you have thwarted me. Time after time you have stood in the way of justice. Now let justice be done.
Tickle torture! Remember, he has claws, so that's actually a legitimate threat.
Batman manages to ensnare the ghoul, letting Dredd zap him with a live wire. Death's incorporeal form tries to exit stage left, but that's when Anderson uses her psionic abilities to trap the evil judge within her own mind. It's been effective on his associates, but she hadn't used the trick on Death himself until now. Mean Angel pokes his head from the rubble, and Dredd shoots his dial to pieces and threatens him to behave before he loses any more of the inside of his head. Tying him up, Joe expects Batman to come along as well. The Dark Knight's response is more or less, yeah, sure, I'll get right on that. They start bickering and posturing, with another fight possible, until Anderson breaks it up with a recap. Not only did Bats save his life, he only broke the law after Dredd pressured him. And most importantly, Judge Death is still in the telepath's noodle, and unless they want more carnage, he needs to be placed in a secure cube real soon. After some more glaring, Dredd relents, Batman giving an almost cutesy smirk, and they take their leave. Activating a signal to have Tech-21 transport them home, the judges watch Batman as he secures Scarecrow, and the comic ends with Mean Machine wondering if all this will affect his chances of parole.
That was Batman Judge Dredd, a grisly, violent tale of two different characters and their equally different views on justice. In my own judgment, I declare that it was surprisingly enjoyable.
You can see why I made this the Halloween episode instead of the other Batman Spawn crossover. I've mentioned before that I don't care for copious amounts of bloodletting or gore, and additionally, I don't really care for this art style. I don't think it's bad, even technically, it's just that it doesn't appeal to me, mostly with how some people look and just strange designs for some vehicles. However, I can recognize and even appreciate the abstract nature. The backgrounds can be pretty vague, but for some reason it doesn't feel overly detrimental. As for the gore, it's graphic, and again, not for young readers or people who are, in general, more sensitive to that kind of thing. But the abstractness of the art kind of dulls the effect, if you ask me. In many, possibly most scenes, there are splatters of red, not just around, say, someone getting stabbed, but in the background or elsewhere in the scene where the violence is happening. It seems to be a kind of indicator of gore, rather than a more realistically detailed drawing of said gore.
Bear in mind, I said most of the scenes are like that, not all. There are moments that are less abstract and more graphic, hence why some of my mosaic censoring got a bit more specific than with other reviews.
There is a little bit of nudity, some of it still covered in some way by shadow or what have you, which does make it a bit more on the mature side, but it's only brief, in the beginning only a couple of examples. I think it may have been because Dredd is a spin-off from the adult-aimed 2000 AD anthology series, which, yeah, not for kids. Also, it's British, so that may explain why some of the stagehands were literally labeled stewards. Maybe also why two people were getting frisky in the middle of a Gotham street. I'll say this much for the panel layout, it got pretty creative. Up to 11 panels on a single page without feeling too crowded. The story never really delved into any kind of introspective, insightful debate on the methods of either title character arguing one over the other. It's really more a clash of personalities. While a more cerebral story is certainly possible with these two, this book isn't aiming for or claiming to be cerebral or deeper than it is. It's meant to be fantastical and even farcical, never taking itself too seriously despite the protagonists and the stakes involved. One definite strength of this book is the kind of humor peppered throughout, from visuals like the pile of bullets that were wasted on Judge Death, to the dialogue from clueless characters like Mean Machine and Benny. As dark as it could get, it still had a lot of funny moments.
If you can handle some blood and abstract namings, as well as accepting the unique art style, I'd recommend giving this a shot. If you're not familiar with the Judge Dredd comics, maybe it'll end up giving you nostalgic feelings towards the Sylvester Stallone movie. I'm the Angry Spork, and man, have I got issues.